Marisha here, and today I'm going to be talking about VE Day because we just celebrated the 80th anniversary just a couple of days ago here in the UK. Now, for my American audience who might not know, VE Day stands for Victory in Europe Day, and it is a celebration of when the Second World War fighting ended in Europe. It wasn't the end of the war entirely because there was still fighting in the Pacific Concert, but ending in Europe was a huge deal because that's where the bulk of the fighting was happening. Lots of places had been ravaged by war, and obviously it was when people were able to start getting into concentration camps and liberating them, all of that. So when VE Day first happened, it was celebrated around the world, but in my memory, when I was growing up and then as an adult, in the States, I don't remember anybody celebrating VE Day. I'm sure it must happen in pockets of sort of military culture, but it doesn't even show up on calendars, the way that Arbor Day does, for example. Um, and I think that's a shame. And over here, because it's the 80th anniversary, there's been kind of a bigger push, a bigger celebration. It's in the news more than it has been in previous years that I've been here. But it's also been brought to my attention more because I'm teaching now and they do a lesson on it in the schools. So on VE Day, all of the students in years 7 through 10 had a lesson first period on VE Day and the fact that it's the 80th celebration of it and what it means. And it was a lesson about freedom and democracy and the importance of those values. And because it was there in my mind even before I went to school and was told, oh, we're going to do this lesson, I had already been kind of sensitive to the fact that we're celebrating victory over fascists, right? But at the same time, in my home country, the government is becoming increasingly fascist and mirroring what was going on in 1930s Germany. And so it was um, really hard for me to kind of have those two things going on at the same time of thinking back about World War II and the fact that like my grandfather fought in World War II in Europe under Patton, and to think about all of the people who fought for those causes, particularly Americans who fought for those causes, and then to see what's happening in America now, and that people are taking things straight out of the Nazi playbook. And a party that once would have considered itself to be a party that would be staunchly like pro democracy, pro individual liberties, um, is now supporting a man who is trying to take liberties away from people and take people's rights away from them. And as I was teaching my students, they weren't really taking it super seriously. They would start having kind of like side conversations until I got to a point where I was just really frustrated. Um, and I said to them, it's really easy to take your freedoms for granted, to take your rights for granted until they get taken away. And Americans, I think, probably thought it would never happen there. But now the government is becoming spiraling into a fascist government. And there are parties here in the UK that would like to follow suit. So it's really important that you take this lesson seriously and that you think about the importance of your freedoms and the importance of democracy, and that it's something that you need to consistently fight for because it's not a guarantee that you're always going to have it. It was a really difficult day for me because that started my day, and then a couple other things happened that weren't related to that. But recently, I have had kind of what's going on in the States in the back of my mind always, and it can be sort of difficult over here because most people don't fully understand. They don't know the extent to what's happening over there. And so if I bring it up, it kind of gets brushed off because I think people still think of Trump as a buffoon, and he is, but he's a very dangerous buffoon because he's surrounded himself by people and he's being influenced by people who are not buffoons. They're genuinely evil. And while I believe he's genuinely evil as well, but I don't think he's brilliant. I think that he is being manipulated and he's a puppet. And I think that people here are really just more aware of like the tariffs thing and less aware of the deportations and the setting up concentration camps in El Salvador and those kinds of things. Um, there are a few people who read the news in depth and might be a little bit more aware, or have a friend who has a daughter who lives in the US and so she's more aware. But for the most part, it is kind of lonely to be here in that sense of like, who do I talk to about this, about my concerns about what's going on back home, my fears for the safety of people that I care about. And so seeing VE Day here celebrated, while it was obviously troubling because you can see the parallels, I also really appreciate that they're celebrating VE Day, that I think that they do a much better job here of educating their citizens and their children about their military history in both world wars, particularly not just World War II, but also World War One, which I think in a lot of, especially in the States, kind of gets overshadowed by World War II. But clearly, we also have not been doing a good job of educating people about World War II to have gotten where we've gotten in the U.S. And so, one of the things that I appreciate here is that they do have that remembrance, and it doesn't come across as a celebration of military in the sense of we're hawkish and we are investing loads and loads of money into the military industrial complex the way that the Americans do, but more in that somber tone of this was a terrible thing, but people stepped up because they needed to do what was right. We're not trying to be the greatest military power in the world. We're not trying to be threatening or intimidating to other people with our military might, but we will step up and do the right thing, and we will honor the people who did that when someone else is being a malignant force in the world. Um, and so the way that they commemorate that here and include it in school lessons to make sure that they're driving home the importance of these are our values. We value freedom and we value democracy, and that people who are from all different backgrounds have a voice and they all have rights, um, and these are things that we're going to fight for. And I really wish that the US would follow suit on that, and I think that there's a part of me that worries it might be too late for that, but that is VE Day, and that's how it's celebrated here. There were parades. There was a flyover. There were some activities that kind of went for several days leading up to the actual anniversary day. Um, there's going to be a display of ceramic red poppies at the Tower of London. And that's going to be on through November. So if you're thinking about maybe visiting London, that might be something you would want to check out. I really do find the way that the Brits kind of, like I said, commemorate World Wars One and World War Two to be better than the way that we do it in the States. Um, and part of that is because they obviously were impacted more than we were. I think part of the problem with the US is that, except for Pearl Harbor, we've never experienced like an attack on our soil until you get to 9/11. But even then, you're talking about an isolated incident. You're not talking about the Blitz, where you're continually bombed and you have to send your children to the countryside. You're not talking about all the trenches that were built in Europe and just like completely destroyed the geography and all of the rebuilding that had to be done after each of the wars. And so I think that's part of why. But also, there is that element of kind of a reluctance to teach history thoroughly. And we're really experience the repercussions of that right now in America, which is really sad. And I try not to get super political on here all the time, but I'm not going to avoid it completely. I can't be silent when my country is completely falling apart and turning into the opposite of what its ideals are. So, VE Day just sort of brought that to the fore of my mind, and so that's what I chose to talk about. I'll try to plan a more lighthearted video for next time, but I'm not going to back down from difficult topics. Like, subscribe, tell your friends how gnarly this channel is, and I'll see you next time.